Andy'd become a busboy for Martha at catering events, too. When he arrived to help clean up after one such party, she was furious because he was a few minutes late. Going down in the elevator, Martha pointed at him and told several of her young female assistants, "Don't ever get married. Men are so stupid and disgusting." Outside, Andy asked Martha for the keys to the car, but instead of handing them to him, she threw them in a puddle and forced him to stoop down and pick them up. What is going on? Hello, how are you? Welcome to my channel. My name is Cheer Denise, and today we're going to keep going with Martha Stewart. Last time we read, Martha had left Wall Street. Being a stockbroker had not panned out for Martha. Part of the problem was you're going to be wrong 40% of the time as a stockbroker, and she couldn't handle that. She needed to be right all the time, and it really bothered her that she was telling people to buy stock that, one day was up but the next day was down, and then she couldn't handle it. It felt bad to her, and so she got out of that, but not before screwing over several of her friends. Anyway, then she's at home, and it's terrible times for her because she's floundering. She doesn't know what to do. She'd been a model, that fizzled out. She'd been a stockbroker, that fizzled out. And now she was standing in the kitchen of this house that she was trying to restore by herself. It's a pretty cool old house, but it's also kind of a dump. And she's got to, or she wants to, completely redo it herself. And she has the skills and ability to do it, but it's just a big project. So she's looking around at herself in this utter dump. And she hates mess, so that's already unsettling for her spirit. She's got a child who is absolutely out of control. Now, Lexi's out of control because Lexi is not loved. And everyone who saw the dynamic between Martha and Lexi were astounded by how bad it was. Lexi, reportedly, was not an unpleasant child around everyone, but Martha just brought out the worst in her. And having been struggling all her life to get attention, she was an attention-seeking child and could be really sort of rambunctious and stuff when you needed her to quiet down. She just really, really wanted attention. At the same time, she had a personality where she would retreat and want to be off by herself a lot too. And she was sort of a quiet child that didn't necessarily know how to mix and mingle socially with others. So one minute she'd be off the walls, driving Martha crazy while Martha's trying to talk to the adults. And the next minute she's this sort of resentful, shy, closed off child that just is sort of emanating a lot of bitterness. But it's understandable because her parents had always shoved her off in the care of somebody else and made it very clear to her that mommy and daddy are busy. Now, supposedly Andy of the two of them was the loving parent, and that if Lexi needed love, she went there. But I don't feel like Andy had enough love to give because Lexi's still begging constantly for people to care. But she doesn't have any tools to ask to be cared for in a way that is winsome. And her parents, it's this horrible cycle where the parents ignore Lexi, Lexi acts out, the parents are annoyed, so they reject her again. And it seems that her parents could never seem to figure out why Lexi was behaving the way she was. Now, Martha writes extensively in all her books about, we're so close, and I did all these things with Lexi, and I wrote her a one-page letter every day. Okay, well, but to hear Lexi tell the tale, she was as unloved, and her childhood was this horrible, bitter thing. Now, many of you are aware that Lexi wrote a memoir, but do not get it and do not think it's going to be the memoir that you want it to be. I wasted a credit on Audible trying to listen to her book, and as it turned out, and I should have done some research about what this was going to be, it would appear that Lexi and some other individual had a radio show for years, and then they decided, and it's like before podcasting, And so then they had written this memoir or this book that was sort of on the back of that radio show. And basically each chapter is a topic, and then they each take a turn in their own voice bitching about that topic. I guess that's like what the radio show is about. And they keep trying to frame it in this sort of we're helping you. This is therapeutic because we're going to bitch and then we're giving you the opportunity to bitch also. Let's just be honest, girls. Life sucks and everyone is the worst. She didn't really grow up to be a very pleasant person, I'm sorry to say. So if you're buying the book thinking this is going to be the revelations of somebody post-therapy who's dealt with their childhood wounds and who has a fresh perspective and is going to tell you from start to finish what it was to be Martha Stewart's daughter, think again and just don't waste that Audible credit. At the end of last chapter, we had read that Martha was starting a catering business, and she called it the Uncatered Affair, which is kind of a cutesy little name because their whole thing was, we cook the food, we bring it to you, you serve it. You didn't have to bother messing your kitchen up and cooking and all this, and everyone's going to think you made the food. But, we're sort of like your fairy godmothers behind the scenes. We don't serve, but we do make it, and everyone thinks you did it yourself. So, it was a clever little idea, and she had help. Norma would get clients in her neighborhood, Martha would get clients in hers, but they'd help each other with the jobs and split the profits 50-50. Meanwhile, Martha's secretly getting her own jobs, little ones that she says are so small and so unimportant that it doesn't even matter. Norma doesn't need to poke her nose into it. Martha can handle it herself, and since she did it herself, she ought to have all the money. And Norma's like, but that's not what I'm doing. I'm doing exactly what we said we were going to do. So what's the deal with this? Anyway, it doesn't go over well. Norma walks in to have a conversation with Martha, only to hear Martha bitching about her to Andy and saying, I ought to get all the profits. I'm the better cook. I'm the better organizer. I'm better at this. Why should I share with Norma? So Norma's like, well, if that's how you feel. And, they don't talk for years after that. But Martha is not about to stop with her uncatered affair. She's got other things. She's got even bigger dreams to be had. And today we're going to start on a chapter entitled The Market Basket. The Common Market in Westport was far ahead of its time in the mid-late 70s. A chic mini-mall housed in a 10,000 square foot barn-like structure overlooking one of the little tributaries of the serene Sagatuck River, it was home to a new wave of upscale boutiques aimed at the area's very affluent residents. The complex had been influenced by Harrods and another London retailing operation called Brown's, a grouping of unique shops on South Moulton Street, selling trendy clothes and other fashionable goods. The Common Market centerpiece was the Ralph Lauren Polo Shop, an elegant and hip setting where customers could try on clothing in dressing rooms that had once been church confessionals. The exclusive Lauren franchise was operated by the owners and founders of the Common Market, John Macht, a former Macy's executive, his then-wife, Gail Lichtman-Macht, who had a background in food and art, and Dick Goldman, a veteran retailer, and his wife, Pat. Their setting drew an affluent clientele. On any day, shoppers might find themselves next to the Paul Newmans or the Robert Redfords, among other celebrities who lived in the area. Besides selling chic apparel, the mall also had a small, charming food court where products from Great Britain's Fortnum and Mason and Crabtree and Evelyn were sold, and every afternoon at 4 o'clock, shoppers were served tea and crumpets. It was a nice little touch, John Macht said, very English, slightly affected, but not bad. A couple of times a week, his wife drove to a wholesale market in the Bronx for fresh fruit, and she also made arrangements to sell brownies and other goodies from Zebar's and fresh breads and eclair croissants from Orwashers, both highly regarded Manhattan purveyors of food. Despite the creative effort, though, the Common Market's food area took in no more than a few $100s a day. Enter Martha Stewart. A free agent now that she and Norma Collier had gone their separate ways, Martha had been intrigued with the potential of the Common Market, nosing around, asking questions, staking out the food area. One day she came in and approached us with the idea of taking over the shop, managing it, infusing it with much more interest, and creating a real food presence in the store, Gail Lichtman-Macht said. The key to Martha's proposal was to sell freshly prepared food, the kind she was known for making. At the time, Lichtman-Macht noted, there were a couple of prepared food stores in New York that were just starting to take off and were getting good word of mouth. It coincided with more women going to work and with people wanting high-quality food that wasn't a frozen dinner. The Common Market partners heard Martha's pitch, liked her vision, and decided she was the one to put their retail food business on the map. All that was required was one final get-together that would allow the owners to see how Martha handled herself in her own environment, Turkey Hill. An intimate lunch was arranged by Martha for Lichtman-Macht. The kitchen was warm and welcoming and wonderful, she recalled. There was no service people. It was all Martha. I sat down, and she served up a fine herb omelet, which she had prepared. She served some rolls, which she said she made, but which I knew she didn't, because I knew Elie Zebar's stuff, and I knew they were from Zebar's. Nevertheless, it was all very nice. But I felt immediately that she was very intimidating, and very appealing, and very attractive all at the same time. And I didn't believe her. She didn't feel real to me. I felt that she was almost too good to be true, and that it was really important for her to present perfection as opposed to a vulnerable self or a natural self. And beneath that, there was a kind of urgency that I felt uneasy about. I found her to be very super competent in the way she did things. For example, chefs chop onions and look at you at the same time, and I'm always saying, "You're going to cut your fingers off." And there was some of that in Martha. There was a kind of practiced, skillful approach to doing things. And it went from the way she prepared the food to the way she spoke, to the way she kind of engineered things. At that lunch, I knew she had a plan, that she was following a script of her own making. Definitely of her own making. She did not write an outline. I didn't see her that way at all. She had it all in her head, and the wheels were always turning. She knew what she wanted to accomplish and how she wanted to accomplish it, and she pulled it off. She made a lovely lunch, and we hired her. They offered Martha a salary of $250 a week to manage the food area, which she immediately named the Market Basket, which the owners thought had a nice ring. The Market Basket at the Common Market. Her agreement with the Mocks and the Goldmans was that she would be in the store 5 days a week, manage and improve the business, prepare the foods, such as pâtés, that were to be sold, create a new look for the shop, and share with the owners a percentage of any catering jobs she generated by way of the Common Market. In the beginning, we were really comfortable that Martha was going to do all these things, Lichtman Mock said. She was going to have a daily menu, which was going to be printed in the local newspaper, and people would come in the morning and order what they wanted for dinner from the menu. Or they'd come in late in the day after the train ride home and pick up dinner. Okay. So, it's a little business that Martha has for herself. Let me just go ahead and tell you, these people are going to regret. They're going to rue the day they cross paths with Martha, because, as is her way, she's going to immediately screw them over. The book goes on to say that without the owner's knowledge, however, Martha ran an ad in the local newspaper seeking women who wanted to make extra money cooking at home and selling their dishes to her. Those women, not Martha, would become the actual cooks, independent contractors, Martha called them, whose food would be resold at the Market Basket at a considerable markup. The women were paid for their time and ingredients. Okay, they are going to talk later at some point about the laws in the 70s. There were laws on the books about licensed kitchens, but they weren't really enforced. It wasn't like a big deal if you broke the law about it. And clearly, Martha understood that there was quite a bit she could get away with. Yuck. Who are these random kitchens? What manner of dog and cat hair is going to be in this food? You know what I'm saying? It's like, I can't think of anything I'd rather not have than food that's been cooked in just some rando's kitchen and then slapped up here at the Common Market Basket, and then I'm going to take that home for dinner. Like, I'd rather just cook my own food. And I'm really not that weird. Like, okay, if I go to like a potluck or something, I feel like I know what I'm getting. You know, the church potluck. I feel like I'm not finicky if I know exactly what's happening here. Like, if I know everybody brought something to the potluck, I know there's some people who will not eat at a potluck. That's stupid. I don't feel that way, but I feel like if I'm going to an establishment, like an actual store, and I was going to buy a prepared dinner, I would love to believe that there was a kitchen in the back where this had been prepared, not somebody's house where God knows what happened while the food was being prepared, and then I'm coming and forking over a hefty sum to eat what is essentially the leftovers from somebody else's kitchen. Like, I don't think so. Anyway, the book goes on to say that what Martha did was both clever and in some ways dishonest, asserted Lichtman mocked. It wasn't how she had presented it to us. On the other hand, it worked very well. While Martha has touched on her catering career in interviews and in books and magazines, she has said little about her role in the retail food business. In entertaining, though, she did mention the Market Basket, putting her own special spin on it. She said she had organized what she described as a guild of local women to cook foods for sale at a small gourmet shop. In the beginning, things went smoothly. Virtually overnight, Martha had transformed the look and the feel of the shop, much to the owner's delight and satisfaction. The space was filled with pretty decorations and charming antiques. Colorful items were scattered throughout the space or hung from the ceiling. The artifacts, jugs, pots, quilts, baskets, some of which were for sale, belonged to a friend of Martha's, an elderly woman who ran a folk art business in Westport. Martha often crowed about her friend's energy and youthfulness. "Can you believe it?" she once declared to Gail Lichtman mocked. "She's in her 60s, and she's still menstruating." All of which was more information than anyone needed to know. But can I just say real quick, let me just insert a picture here. Martha's idea of what was awesome does not strike my fancy. Martha's idea of decorating at this time was the most cluttered, overwhelming, claustrophobic idea of design that I've ever seen. The kitchen that was often featured at this time, I cannot stand. And even now, when I've seen pictures of her kitchen, which was featured in the Netflix documentary, it's so cluttered. I can't stand it. But at this time, this was a look like people constantly talked about how charming her kitchen was. And all I can think is, oh my gosh, somebody get me out of what appears to be a junk shop. I think that's the look she transported over to the market basket. And I know that it was a look of the time, but my goodness, I'm glad we sort of stripped back a bit. A few of those things, sure, but there's just so much on display. You don't even know where your eyes are supposed to look. I mean, is this 1830 and did I just pull up to the common general store? Anyway, meanwhile, Martha's call for cooks was met with an enthusiastic response. Interestingly, a number of respondents were coming from troubled situations. Some were in rocky marriages or had been recently separated or divorced and were searching for something to occupy their time. Still others had psychological or emotional problems. And most of those chosen by Martha shared a trait. They were non-confrontational and submissive. As one former close associate of Martha's observed years later, Martha often got involved with highly creative women whom she could dominate, manipulate, use, and abuse. Women who wouldn't fight back. They'd be mistreated and come back for more. They'd have a love-hate relationship with Martha. It was very weird. On a bitterly cold, snowy day after reading Martha's advertisement, 23-year-old Vicky Negrin placed a little basket on the doorstep at Turkey Hill, an offering that she hoped would win her a job and secure for her a bit of validation and recognition. The contents included samples of her workmanship, a swatch of fabric imprinted with leaves, a few small watercolor paintings, baked goods, and some writings. With long curly hair, doe eyes, and a childlike voice, Negrin had an ethereal quality. She'd studied art and dance at Bennington and hoped to transfer to Martha's alma mater Barnard, and eventually got a degree in literature from Columbia. For a time, she had worked as an assistant to a New York artist-writer and his wife, and had helped them produce a book. At the time she answered Martha's ad, the 5'6" Negrin, a victim of eating disorder, anorexia nervosa, weighed between 90 and 100 pounds. After interviewing her in the cozy kitchen at Turkey Hill, Martha immediately hired Negrin essentially to manage the market basket, which Martha was supposed to do. Vicky was like Martha's personal slave, recalled John Mocht. Martha worked her all kinds of hours. She used to chastise her, and she used to take credit for what she did, and she was very domineering and dominating over her. Vicky was a lost soul. Gail Lickman Mocht agreed. Martha was like Simon Legree to Vicky's Topsy, she observed. Martha was an absolute taskmaster. It was a very symbiotic relationship. Vicky needed to be abused, and Martha abused her. Vicky was the first anorexic I ever met. I didn't even know what the disorder was. I just knew she was painfully thin, and she was inordinately connected to food, and she was at Martha's beck and call, an absolute doormat, which was kind of disturbing. Years later, healthy, married, and the mother of 5 children, Negrin candidly and painfully recalled that period of time, about 4 years in all, that she and Martha were linked in what Negrin agreed was a dominant-submissive relationship of sorts. I was like the little waif who trotted after her and did everything that I was supposed to do and pick up the crumbs, she said. I didn't quite idolize her, but I admired her. I was a little afraid of her because I was fearful anyway, so she had a grip on me. I was always scared and wanted to please. Martha can be a tyrant, very critical and unscrupulous, and make people feel bad enough so they'll do better. Negrin could not recall any specific details of Martha's treatment of her. When things are painful, you blot them out, she pointed out. I blotted it all out. It did happen, and that's why I ended it with her, and that's why I didn't go back for more. Martha had led Negrin, who was paid very little and who worked very long hours, to believe that the market basket was her brainchild and that she was a partner in the business. She also recalled that there was constant friction among Martha, the Mochts, and the Goldmans. I could feel the friction. I could feel that Martha wasn't happy being there, and I could feel that the Mochts and the Goldmans weren't really happy about Martha being so independent and strong. Negrin said that some of the arguments had to do with Martha's not sharing with the owners their cut from catering jobs she generated through the store. There would usually be these flare-ups after she'd catered a party, Negrin recalled. Martha would get really angry and leave. There was a lot of tension, stress, and smoke. Okay. Now that we've been introduced to poor waif like Negrin, she is about to get royally screwed over in this next chapter. And the fact that she was able to stay with Martha for 4 years just is a testament to how badly she was already doing psychologically, emotionally, mentally, and, clearly physically. She's 5'6" and weighs 90 pounds. So she was just in a real good place for Martha to keep beating her down. But the way they do her in this next chapter is horrifying because it just shows what an abusive person Martha was. She could see with her own eyes that this poor girl was very easy to manipulate, and she took full advantage. All right, now this chapter is called The Gnome's Cookbook, and there's a little bit of a backstory too when we finally get to Negrin, but hang on, hold on, because it's all going to come together. The book says that around the time Martha left the world of high finance for Cosmos of Food, Andy, at 35, had abandoned his staid position at Bangor Punta for the far more glamorous and creative universe of publishing. When Bangor Punta's general counsel moved to the Times Mirror Company in 1973 as a publishing conglomerate's general counsel, he hired Andy as his assistant general counsel. Martha was pleased. The new job had cachet and prestige and paid more money than Andy had ever made before. She also saw Andy's position as an opportunity for her. Thinking that one day she might want to write a cookbook, she now had the perfect entree into publishing. It couldn't hurt. After all, Times Mirror was at the time a media giant, owning 9 book companies, a slew of popular magazines, and a number of influential newspapers. In 1976, Andy's boss, Martin Levin, a vice president in charge of book publishing, was faced with a major problem. What to do about 80-year-old Harry Abrams, the feisty founder and driving force behind Harry and Abrams Incorporated, publisher of lavish coffee table books. Because Abrams was in poor health and extremely difficult to deal with, Levin had quietly started looking for a successor. Andy thought Levin had gone off the deep end when he offered him the job. But the timing couldn't have been better. Andy had grown to love publishing and had tired of the law. In 1976, after several months of negotiations, he was appointed executive vice president of Abrams. Not long after Andy took office, Harry Abrams and Martin Levin got into an enormous fight that ended with Abrams storming out of the company, taking with him a number of the best book projects scheduled for the next few years, which he used to start as a new company, Abbottville Press. At that point, Andy was immediately promoted to president and chief executive officer of Abrams, with an enormous salary and fabulous perks. Overnight, he'd become a publishing mogul. He felt as if he had died and gone to heaven. In 1977, when Martha had started working at the Market Basket, Andy's career at Abrams was soaring, launched by a giant bestseller about little people entitled Gnomes. The beautifully illustrated and imaginatively written book described the enchanting habits and life of mythical gnomes, and had been published successfully a year earlier in the Netherlands and was being peddled unsuccessfully in this country until Andy picked up the U.S. rights for a song, even though he was practically laughed out of the editorial board meeting at which he proposed the acquisition. The book, including the beautiful calligraphy, had to be translated into English. However, instead of securing the services of a professional calligrapher, who would expect to be paid well and receive acknowledgement and possibly even royalties, Andy talked to Martha, who talked to her talented worker, Vicky Negrin. Overjoyed to get recognition for her artistry, the acquiescent and dutiful young woman agreed to do the calligraphy on a wink and a nod. Okay, so I just want to say real quick, Andy gets a pass a lot because next to Martha, he was this sort of puppy dog, bear cub cutie who just never wanted to hurt anybody, But he has some of his own ways about him. Now, you could just call it business. But screwing people over, if you've gotten to the point in your life where, just screwing people over is what business is, where's your conscience, friend? Vicky clearly was a person where it was very evident she could be preyed upon. Martha had already staked her out as an easy to prey upon person. But Andy now is also beginning to take advantage of this poor woman because he knew that she would just be so happy for anybody to notice her artistic abilities, that he would use her without having to pay her or acknowledge what she had done, and that it would be sort of a let's pay you under the table kind of thing, and then he would just stand to profit even more. That's wrong. It's not like the company didn't have enough money to pay somebody to properly do the job. Not that she wasn't going to do it properly, but they are not going to properly pay or acknowledge the artistry that she provides. But this isn't the first time they're going to screw her over when it comes to this project, so sit tight. Vicky had this beautiful spidery writing, but she told me she never got any real credit, said Hujala Husu, one of the women Martha had hired to cook for the Market Basket. She was as upset as someone like Vicky, the soft, gentle sort of person, could get. And I said to her, listen, ask them to give it to you in writing next time. After Gnomes was published, Negrin received a pittance for her work, $100, and no written acknowledgement in the first edition. I just figured that there would be acknowledgement because I'd always gotten it on books that I'd worked on with others before, Negrin said. I must have mentioned that to Martha, and Martha said, I'll fix it. They put my name in the second printing, but it was never in again because I guess they just didn't think it was that important. When the book became a bestseller, Negrin wasn't invited to any of the publishing soirees thrown by Abrams or the Stewarts. How? That book would not have even gotten off the ground. Okay, it was not in English. All the calligraphy had to be translated and redone. The calligraphy is a massive inclusion on the entire style of the book. To disregard what she had done, to act as though it's not important, to just sort of be like, oh, did you want credit for that? Oh, sorry, maybe next time, maybe next edition. And then it was only in the second edition, and then it would appear that after that they didn't add it in again. It's like they were actively screwing her over. $100 for a calligraphy job of this length, the time it would have taken to do this. $100. Are we good? And no acknowledgement. You understand. No, I don't. And poor Vicky is too starved and hungry to realize that, she's being screwed over. A shrewd publisher and promoter, Andy told the people at the New York Times book review that Gnomes was nonfiction. He wasn't really lying, only following the author's point of view. The book had been written as if gnomes actually exist, and since no one had come forward to disprove the thesis, Andy felt comfortable with his pitch, though he was surprised and amused that the paper went for it. Gnomes became a New York Times nonfiction bestseller, quite a feat since the book's subject clearly had nothing to do with reality. Along with the book's phenomenal sales, more than 1 million copies, there were enormous profits from licensing agreements for spin-off products, Gnomes towels, Gnomes canvas book bags, Gnomes miniature ceramic figures, Gnomes date books, Gnomes posters, and even a Gnome sleeping bag, among other items. Hollywood cashed in on the act too, with a Gnomes video and a made-for-TV Gnomes movie. Because of Andy's vision, royalties and residuals rolled into Abrams' coffers, along with the giant profits from the ongoing sale of the book. But God forbid they actually credit the woman who did the calligraphy and pay her more than $100. Witnessing this success and the potential for lucrative spin-offs, Martha, who was still juggling management of the market basket with her catering, wanted a piece of the action. One of her ideas was a chain of fast food health food restaurants called Gnome Huts, a concept she bounced off the ever-accommodating Vicky Negrin. Martha's idea was you drive up and get yourself carrot juice and your hummus sandwich with garden vegetables, she recalled. Martha said it would be a franchise just like McDonald's. And remember, Martha knew all about McDonald's. She'd peddled their stock back in her day. The imaginative Negrin, however, had a more realistic idea that grabbed Martha's attention. Negrin had been working on a little recipe book that would celebrate life in nature the way that gnomes would have done it. The book, which she had tentatively entitled The True Book of Gnome Cookery, later changed by Martha to the Gnomes Cookbook, contained recipes for meals such as daydream sandwiches, full moon pancakes, spring pea salad. There was a section on principles, practices, and methods of the gnome kitchen, and a chapter on how gnomes, talismans, chants, and charms played an important role in gnome cooking. Martha saw the commercial potential immediately. She said, "This is a great idea," Negrin recalled. She told me that she would help me market the book, and Andy was going to publish it. It was my idea. I made up the recipes and the stories. It had my drawings, my paintings. I even matched the watercolors to the ones in the gnome's book. My soul was in that book. But Martha appeared to have a different agenda from the one that she communicated to Negrin. Big surprise. She immediately proposed the Gnomes Cookbook to Andy, who also saw its money-making potential. He put together a draft of a publishing agreement that called for an advance of at least several $1,000s for Martha's, not Negrin's, first book. But Martin Levin hit the ceiling when he heard about the project. He believed a book written by the publisher's wife. Apparently, no one ever mentioned Negrin. He believed that it was a conflict of interest, and he ordered Andy to drop the project post-haste. Martha was furious and called Levin's decision stupid. "Who else could do a book like this better than me? I could do it better than anybody," she declared. "Except it ain't your book, Martha. Not the pictures, not the drawings, not the recipes, not the layout, not nothing." Martha then told the innocent Negrin that Abrams had decided against publishing because the authors of the original Gnomes book wouldn't give their approval. In the end, Negrin said, "I felt used by Martha." In the understatement of the year. Vicky, you felt used. You were wrung out by these people. What are you talking about? You felt used. Martha took everything of your idea. Only thing she changed was the name. She took your entire book, scooped it up, took it to the publishers, offered it. They said, we can't publish something by the publisher's wife. That's a little, too close to home. And rejected the project because of that. And Martha goes there and says, we couldn't get the original publishers to agree, so I'm sorry. That wasn't why, okay? She was so jealous of Vicky that she stood in Vicky's way on purpose. When she couldn't rob Vicky of this project and put her own name on it, she just let the whole thing be thrown into the garbage dump. That is outrageous that she would stand in Vicky's way like this. She's just jealous because what kind of an idea is gnome huts where you can drive up and it's a fast food restaurant with health food? I mean, really? That's just such an ambitious project. Not saying it couldn't happen, but it's like this is a blip, a trend. Believe me, no one's going to care about the gnomes in 5 years. By the time you've actually got stores out there, no one's even going to care about the gnomes anymore. The cookbook was a way better idea, and Martha saw that instantly. Stole it right out of Vicky's hands. But if you are just astounded at the way that Martha and Andy are kicking poor little Vicky around, what with her eating disorder and her emotional deficiencies, you will be floored by this next chapter in the way that Martha treats Andy when he has a devastating diagnosis. And once again, Martha just shows how much she doesn't love Andy. This chapter says that the enormous success that Andy was savoring in his first year as a publisher was overshadowed by a dark cloud that appeared from nowhere, leaving him terrorized and bewildered, and Martha in a state of high anxiety about her future. It began routinely on a bitterly cold day in early March 1977, when Martha's younger brother, George Christensen, went canoeing on the rapids of the Housatonic River in rural Connecticut. Of Martha's 3 brothers, Andy had always been closest to George, a frail, sad youngster who often was the target of his father's verbal abuse. Andy had witnessed George, between the ages of 8 and 15, sometimes reduced to tears by Eddie Costara's sharp tongue. Unlike his strapping brothers, Eric and Frank, George didn't fight back. Later, George abandoned the name Costara and adopted his wife's maiden name, some say despite his father. Because of George's problems at home, Andy and Martha had taken him under their wing, and he often spent extended periods with the Stewarts at Turkey Hill and at Middlefield. We were extremely close, Christensen acknowledged. It was just like Andy and Martha were my surrogate parents. And I will say, just real quick, that Martha doesn't have very many good characteristics, but this is not the only sibling that she takes in. She has another sister named Laura, who she lets live. We have more about that later. And the relationship is so bitter and terrible that it's almost like, is it a blessing to have a home at Martha's? But anyway, I will say she did open the door to her siblings. On that fateful day on the Housatonic, Christensen was 25, 3 years out of Rutgers University, and a Sears Roebuck Executive Training Program dropout. He couldn't take it. He couldn't take the corporate inbreeding and the cutthroatness, as he put it, and discovered he was allergic to certain odors in the stores. He then moved in with the Stewarts in Westport, became a carpenter's apprentice, and found his calling working with his hands. With Martha's help and her controlling influence, he eventually started a contracting business. Though indebted and staunchly loyal to her, they would have their share of battles. The river was extremely rough the day Andy and Christensen went out, and as they were negotiating the rapids, their canoe suddenly overturned. Andy slammed into a rock, hitting it hard with his hip, which was bruised and painful, but the injury quickly healed and soon was forgotten. 2 months later, in early May, the same month Andy announced the September publication of Gnomes at the American Booksellers Association convention in San Francisco, he discovered a lump where he had been injured. His doctor told him not to worry, but Andy sought a second opinion and was advised to have the mass removed. Surgery was scheduled at Roosevelt Hospital, where Lexi had been born a dozen years earlier. On the day of Andy's operation, Martha shocked co-workers by reporting to work at the market basket. He was in the hospital, and she was at the store, recalled Eva Weiner. I said, "What in the world are you doing here?" And Martha said, "I have a business to run." She's a tough person, and it didn't seem to faze her. The biopsy showed that Andy's tumor was cancerous, caused, the doctor speculated, by the trauma of the blow he had received in the river. At Sloan Kettering, the famed Manhattan Cancer Hospital, Andy was bluntly told by a surgeon that he had 3 options: radiation, amputation of his leg, or death. Andy was overcome with fear. Martha didn't know what had hit her. The next day at the market basket, she recounted the terrible news to Gail Lichtman-Mocht. "This is sort of so typical of Martha," Lichtman-Mocht recalled. She told me that she dropped Andy at his office after visiting the doctor so he could pick up some papers, and she was waiting double parked in a car for him, and a policeman wanted to give her a ticket. She said it was more than she could take, and she broke down and started to cry and said, "Please, please don't give me a ticket," and he didn't. When she related the story, it was more like, "Look what I accomplished. He didn't give me the ticket," rather than, "My husband has cancer. It's so awful." She was talking about how overwhelmed she felt, but it really became about the parking ticket and not about Andy's cancer. And that's kind of how she did things mostly. You lost track of the fact that the reason she was in the car in the first place was that poor Andy had cancer. Within days of the publication of Gnomes, Andy began the first of more than 24 debilitating radiation treatments, the outcome of which was uncertain. At the office, he kept his cancer a secret. Meanwhile, Martha had gone into what seemed some viewed as a terrible depression. "Martha collapsed, basically," stated George McCulley. "I went down there right after his surgery, and it was the first time I'd seen them since Andy was diagnosed. I found Martha in the darkened bedroom. She was totally destroyed, abject. I sat on the bed next to her, holding her hand while she cried. She said she was nothing without Andy, that she was totally dependent on him, and that she just didn't know what she'd do if she lost him." Well, that sounds nice. I wish she'd, turn to Andy and tell him all these things, because I'm sure he'd like to know. Anne Brodie believed that Martha had begun to take a long, hard look at what the future held for her now that Andy's life was in jeopardy. "Prior to his illness, they were not happy as a couple, and I thought that marriage was going to break up," she said. "But when Andy got sick, their cross-dependencies went back into place, and I felt they got close again. But his illness might have given Martha a little more impetus to push harder and faster. I think Martha was thinking about her future even before Andy got sick. She wondered what would happen to that perfect little world she tried to create with her house and barn and chickens, that edifice that she felt would give her some dimension. Martha cried. Martha hurt. Well, just as you're thinking to yourself, well, maybe this is a good thing that Andy got cancer, right? Like maybe Martha is going to have a realization that Andy is not this horrible person who's just so stupid and bumbling that he's just constantly tripping up her feet. Maybe she's going to see that she needs Andy, but this moment of compassion is going to be short-lived, I'm sorry to say. The book goes on to say that it struck members of the Stewart's inner circle as strange to see Martha showing compassion for Andy after years of witnessing her treating him like shit, as Jill Baumser noted bluntly. "I've never seen anybody treat a husband or a maid the way she treated Andy," Baumser declared. "She was verbally abusive, unbelievably critical, constantly belittling. Andy would kind of laugh it off or be embarrassed or squirmy, but he never said, 'F you, Martha.' He just had this embarrassed look on his face as if to say, 'Can you imagine that my wife's really talking to me like this?'" On Mother's Day, Andy had a special surprise for Martha. He'd gotten up early, gone to the kitchen, and fixed a tray for her with freshly cut roses in a vase. But Martha had awakened in a bad mood, complained that something on the tray wasn't right, and threw it at him. While she bathed, he was forced to get down on his hands and knees and clean up the breakfast he had lovingly prepared for her. Andy'd become a busboy for Martha at catering events, too. When he arrived to help clean up after one such party, she was furious because he was a few minutes late. Going down in the elevator, Martha pointed at him and told several of her young female assistants, "Don't ever get married. Men are so stupid and disgusting." Outside, Andy asked Martha for the keys to the car, but instead of handing them to him, she threw them in a puddle and forced him to stoop down and pick them up. What is going on that Andy would take this? Does he like it? Because I can't imagine. I hate this so much for Andy. But the thing is, I know he doesn't like it because he is going to talk to friends about how much he hated this. He hated this treatment. Martha's public abuse of Andy seemed unrelenting and had become widely known to friends and colleagues who whispered among themselves about her latest outrage. For example, as the Stewarts drove home on a cold, rainy late November night after an evening at the theater in New York City with their friends, Bart and Mariana Pasternak, their suburban blue attire, Andy managed to maneuver the big vehicle to the side of a dangerous stretch of I-95, but when he got outside in the driving rain to change the tire, he had difficulty finding the jack, which was out of view in the darkened engine compartment. Meanwhile, Martha had started screaming at him, blaming him for the blowout, accusing him of not watching the road so as to avoid hitting the piece of metal that had caused the flat, denouncing him as a moron for not knowing where the jack was stored. Adding insult to injury, she made him take off the new raincoat that she had bought him because she didn't want it to get dirty while he fixed the tire, forcing him to get drenched in his tuxedo. "What you got the raincoat for, then? You stupid witch. She treated him like a dog, declared Martha's brother Frank Costira. I remember one instance when Martha threw a Christmas party and there were guests like Patty Hearst there, and she huffed and screamed at Andy and snarled, "Get that out of here! How dare you bring that in here!" Because he placed a trash can near the table and had forgotten to put a liner in it. We all were together in New Orleans at a book convention, and Martha had to leave early because one of the gardeners had burned up a tractor in the barn at Westport. I stayed on with Andy because he wanted to take a trip down the Mississippi River, but she wouldn't let him enjoy it. She kept calling him, saying, "Get back up here this minute." I listened in on the telephone conversation because we were in the same hotel room, and she was just bitching and bitching at him. "You need to be up here. You don't need to be down there. Come right back now." She couldn't accept the fact that he was going to take a day off and be with a family member and not be doing something for her. George McCulley, a frequent guest at Turkey Hill, particularly after his divorce from Emily McCulley in the late 70s, witnessed Martha's treatment of Andy firsthand. During one visit, Martha had asked Andy and McCulley to move a pile of lumber that was being used in the construction of the barn, and the two men had worked from morning until late afternoon in the heat. When they finished, Martha arrived to inspect their work. "Of course she wasn't happy and threw a scene," McCulley said. "Oh, you're so stupid. You put the wood over there. I wanted it over here." She just gave us hell and wanted us to move all that wood again. Andy, looking sheepishly, said, "Oh, Martha." And I said, "Martha, why don't you go F yourself?" Now, I don't think anybody ever talked to her that way. Certainly not Andy. She was stunned. Her jaw dropped. Her eyes opened wide. She stormed out of there. But I was angry. I thought, well, screw her. I don't need this. Andy whispered, "Don't talk to her like that." And I said, "Andy, if you're not afraid to throw a bigger scene than Martha, she's going to run all over you." On another occasion, Martha had dispatched Andy and his one-time UVA roommate and longtime friend Jean Levy, who was visiting Turkey Hill from Little Rock, to Middlefield to clean the grounds and plant some trees. But they soon hit rock, making the site unusable. I said, "Andy, let's move away from the rock and plant over there." And he said, "Oh, no. Martha would not be happy unless these trees are in a perfectly straight line. She'd be furious with me." Here we were, 200 miles away from Martha, and she's controlling everything that Andy and I were doing. It was crazy. Some years later, a journalist writing a magazine profile of Martha contacted Levy, who recounted the tree planting incident, which became part of the published piece. I told the reporter, "Martha's a brilliant person, but she's very controlling." That's a true fact. After the article ran, I got a message from Martha on my answering machine. "Jean, how could you insult me the way you did? Why don't you wait until I'm dead to say bad things about me? Call me back. I want to discuss this." And I called her back. I got her machine. I just said, "Martha, I never said anything derogatory about you. I just told the truth. You're a controlling person." But I made her very mad. It infuriated her. She never talked to me again. George McCulley was also present when Martha made embarrassing remarks about Andy's abilities in bed, which she described as inadequacies. One time, Andy became so infuriated, according to McCulley, that he told Martha, "Well, the only reason we didn't have more children is that you didn't want any more stretch marks." She was just putting him down sexually. Not that he couldn't get it up, but that he didn't want to make love enough, or whatever. And from what I understand of Andy, that's not true. In direct contradiction to her put-downs, Martha frequently bragged to her women friends about Andy's prowess, even offering him to them, like one of her market basket desserts, according to Norma Collier. One day, when we had the uncatered affair, Martha and I were driving to the apple orchard in her truck, and I was unburdening myself to her because it was the end of my marriage. I had no relationship with my husband at the time. And Martha said to me, much to my amazement, "If you can't sleep with your husband, you can sleep with Andy. He's really good. He'll do anything you tell him to. Andy has always been in love with you. You can have him." Can you imagine her offering her husband? I laughed. I said, "Martha, you've got to be kidding." And she said, "No, he's really very good in bed." And I said, "I'm not going to share your husband. It is bizarre." At the same time that Martha was curiously offering Andy sexual services, she was also extremely possessive of him. Martha's college chum, Wendy Supovitz Riley, who had lived for a time with her first husband in Greenwich, not far from Westport, recalled an odd conversation she had with Martha that left her feeling a bit shaken. Martha said something strange like, "Oh, I've got to watch out for you, Wendy. We can't have you around here too much because Andy's an eye for pretty girls." And I said, "Phooey, why would you say something like that?" Since Martha was so much prettier than I was, I just took what she said to be meaningless. I felt, why would he look at me? I never once thought Andy played around. He was very charming, very polite, very pleasant, just what one would expect. Once Martha arranged for another extremely attractive former Barnard friend to stay the night at Turkey Hill with Andy while she was out of town. Later, Martha savored speculating about whether Andy and the friend had slept together. Why is Martha creating all this drama? I mean, is she trying to drive him into the arms of another woman so she can be mad about it? As for her own sexuality, Martha once boasted while trading war stories with a girlfriend in a Chinese restaurant. I can will an orgasm whenever I want. I have the power. Having an orgasm is like anything else in life. It's about power. At the same time, she lamented the fact that she didn't have an opportunity to have a lot of sexual experiences before she met and married Andy. When Martha's catering business took off and the kitchen was jumping with attractive young assistants, Martha put out the word that none of them was to have any communication with her husband. Even magazine editors doing shoots at the house were given similar warnings. We were told, don't talk to Andy, don't look at Andy. Martha was bitterly jealous, and if you do, you'll never be back here, recalled Mary Emmerling, decorating and food editor at Mademoiselle at the time. So of course we obeyed the rules. But I never got the impression that Andy was a flirt. He was always a perfect gentleman. Despite their marital history, Andy hoped some good would come from his brush with cancer, that Martha would soften toward him, that the tragedy would bring them close together. Instead, according to a confidant, Martha aimed more anger at him. She told him many times that he was stupid for going canoeing, that he was to blame for his cancer. She was in a constant state of irritation and anger. She also told Andy that she had to look at him as being dispensable. Later, she even claimed to some people that he didn't have cancer, that he was pretending, just to get her sympathy. That's where we end today. Was that not a crazy read? I mean, it just went from crazy to crazier to craziest. I'm telling you, this book rivals the Ethel book without question. And it does not stop getting crazy. Martha was an insane person and treated people like dirt. People who worked for her, the man she's married to. If you were annoying her, she was going to take out all of her wrath and indignation on you. At this point, she's like a rageaholic. She needs to just lose her mind on people. She's got all this pent-up rage and anger and anxiety in her heart about everything. And rather than deal with it in a normal way, she tries to make everything perfect. And because it's not a perfect world and you can't control everybody, she's constantly angry because she can't control things, and it's making her feel really frustrated and really mad and really angry. And even if you're not in her way, but if you're in the room, she's going to take out her anger on you. It's unbelievable to me that she had as much success as she did, and that she was able, I feel like, for so long to get people to believe that, well, maybe she didn't seem like she was a super warm person. She was a good, nice person, just maybe a little bit austere, but, generally quite nice. Because she did nice things. She cooked things, She made a nice, clean house, and she had chickens. What kind of a mean person can cook nice things and sew something pretty and has a nice house and has chickens? It just all seems so soft and matronly that it was hard to believe that though she was, somewhat cold, underneath it all, she must have been a nice person. Jerry Oppenheimer is ripping the veil right off her eyes on this one. I mean, my goodness. So what do you think today? What shocked you the most in today's reading? Let me know about it in the comments, and I'll see you guys later. Bye.